I went back and forth on a title for this message. I ended up upon the title of Rich on Earth or Rich in Heaven. You decide. So we're going to be reading verses 13 through 34. I'm going to go ahead and just read the whole thing, and then we'll dig in after that. Starting in verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.'" Continuing in verse 22, "And he said to his disciples, 'Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today, and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried. For all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and all these things will be added to you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." So I want to start off giving some brief context. So in those times, the firstborn would have gotten a double portion of the inheritance. How many of us in this room are the oldest child? I'm included. So you would have gotten a double portion of the inheritance. However, many of us that are not the oldest child, that are younger, you wouldn't have gotten that. How many of us think that would be fair? If we had that today, and let's say our older brother got double as much as we got, how much do we think that's fair? Do we think that's fair at all? How often do we find ourselves in those positions today? Not necessarily with what our inheritance is, but even just things that we don't have that we want to have in the world, right? We think of the saying, keeping up with the Joneses. Well, the Joneses aren't technically, they're just used as a figurative family of somebody that has more than what we have, has something else, has something nicer, has a newer version, newer edition of this that we don't have, that we are trying to get to, that we're automatically always trying to strive to chase to this person. We're striving to chase these worldly things. Many times I feel we want the latest and greatest of X thing. Name your, fill in the blank answer. Someone may have it that we don't. We couldn't buy this because we didn't have the money for that, but they just got it handed to them. Are we wanting it just to say, go to our friends, come to church, go to our friends and say, hey, look at this. Like, Josh and I like watches. Are we just going to each other and say, hey, I got this nice watch. Haha, you don't have that. No, we're not. We're not doing that. There's always the quote that says money buys happiness. Well, I think money buys you things that can make you happy, but that's so temporary. The Lord gives us our happiness, right? The Lord gives us happiness, and it never fails. The Lord is our ultimate provider. He gives us everything that we need. We just have to ask him, right? The Lord will give us what we need in times of need. One story. So, growing up when I was years ago, we had gone to this nice steakhouse in Tampa, Florida called Burns Steakhouse. And I didn't know what it was at the time. But apparently it's very expensive and people would go there all the time. Celebrities would go there. And, we can often go to different places and do different things. Let's say, hey, we're going to meet this person. But why are we doing that? Are we going to meet this person and coming back and saying, bragging about it? Hey, I met insert your favorite singer, popular artist, anything you want. Or, yeah, I went to this place. We can oftentimes do that. And even with social media. Social media, I feel like, shows us the best 10% of our life. So everything looks fantastic online, right? But then when you actually get into it, it's not really that good. Some people may even seem happy on the outside, but what are they really what's going through their lives on the inside? They'll maybe put on a face to say they'll come to church, laugh around, enjoy time with friends, but what's really going on the inside? Continuing in verse 15, Jesus warns us against all covetousness, right? Let's go ahead and read that again. He said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." Owning things is fun, right? It's nice to have things. It's nice to have the things that we take for granted every day, so to speak. But we should not be just wrapped up in everything that we own. I think oftentimes our lives get defined by what we own or what we do. Are we truly seeking and valuing the right things in our lives? Whether that be I'm striving to have the ultimate success in my career. I want to be the top dog in my job. Or I want to make the most amount of money and things, and be a professional athlete. But is that really what matters or what's valuable here? Our lives are more than the things that we own here on earth. We are just passing through, right? Matthew 6:19 through 21. "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Has anyone had anything taken from them? Something that was theirs, that wasn't, that then someone else came by and just snatched it from you? In preschool, we had show and tell. I had this Snapple tee in my backpack that I was so proud to bring to show and tell. So we had my backpack on the hook. Someone else came up and it was their turn to share, right? See what they brought. What did they bring up? The Snapple that was in my backpack. And they thought, they just went and took it. And so I went to go find it and realized it wasn't there, right? They took from me what I had brought and claimed it as their own. People can steal stuff on earth, but the treasure that we have in heaven, no one can take that away from us, right? Everything that is being built up in heaven for us cannot be destroyed. There's no, as it says in Matthew and then also in Luke, it said, no moth or thief is going to steal or destroy what we've got. If you have moths can destroy clothes, you can get holes in clothes, and moss could have eaten the clothes. And we even see that as well in this passage. Just to give a little more context, I'm sorry. I'm back a page. One thing I heard once, and from then on I kind of like to say it, is you never see a hearse pulling a U-Haul behind it, right? When someone's dead, and they put the casket in the hearse, and they're going to the gravesite, you don't see a U-Haul with all of their possessions just in it going there, right? As we know, our possessions don't go with us when we die. As much as we want to build up a lavish lifestyle on earth and have all these nice things, once we pass away, we won't have any of those anymore, right? So yeah, all the nice cars, the nice, chains we may have around our necks, nice watches, nice whatever you want to call it. We're not going to have those. And don't get me wrong, while I'm not saying that having things is wrong, right? The point is, what are we making our lives about? Are our lives about the possessions that we have, or is it about the Lord? If it's more about the possessions than we have, we're completely missing the mark. Our lives are about the Lord, and that should remain our ultimate priority. We shouldn't place our value in the possessions. As we had just read, they're going to break, right? Just yesterday in small group, we're sitting there talking, and I had my sunglasses in my hand, and all of a sudden, it snaps in half. One of the frames falls out on the ground, and so then, I'm just left with sunglasses that don't really do anything anymore, right? Is my value in my sunglasses? Because if it was, it's completely gone, right? They're broken, and now I have no value. But our value in the Lord stays the same. The ultimate treasure is waiting for us in heaven. It'll never grow old or become obsolete. It'll never be, no, it's not for you anymore. We always have that treasure waiting for us. In verses 16 and 17, one thing we see from this is that the man with the farm was already successful. He had nowhere to store his crops. His farm was already overflowing. The barns and everything were already overflowing. He had nowhere to put anything else. While this may seem like it was a good problem to have, was he truly thinking about it in the right way? He was more concerned I need more space to do more things. But it was less focused on, thank the Lord for what he's given me already. The man didn't seem to be thankful. Instead, it kind of seemed like, I did all this by myself, so let me just go build bigger and, keep going like that. Bigger is not always better, right? Is there anything that we take for granted in our own lives that the Lord's blessed us with, but we may not necessarily thank him for? Whether our parents have multiple cars, if you were to have 2 cars and then all of a sudden go down to 1, instantly you'll be thankful that you had 2. What about, even one for my life that I truly kind of took for granted for the longest time until I got older? What about the sacrifices our parents made while we're growing up? Many of us play sports. I played sports all throughout my life. Even I played travel basketball. Travel basketball is not cheap, and many of the tournaments are not local. You're having to travel hours upon hours every weekend, back to back to back. And my team wasn't even that good. We would get creamed by every team we played. But that was one thing that I never realized until later on, that, I just thought it was something we did. But that was something my parents sacrificed their time and their money for me. Another thing, I mentioned I play sports. I'm always trying to improve. Whether that be making more basketball shots, throwing a tighter spiral, running a faster 5K. I'm always trying to be better. And even though I may not play on a team, I'm still trying that to this day. One thing that I really got thinking of, though, especially with running, I would tend to get very I or me focused, however you want to look at it. And I would say, I beat my best time today, or I ran my best race today. Is that really how we should be looking at it, though? I quickly turned that into, thank you, Lord, for allowing me to improve upon my time today. Because it's not upon what I did. The Lord allowed me to do it. But how often do we, say, oh yeah, well, I did this. The success is all because of I did. I had to learn all these things, or I built this company to get to this point. No, the Lord allowed us to do that. Moving on, in verses 18 and 19, we see the solution was to tear down what was existing and build up bigger barns. He kind of just did this on a whim, right? It's from at least what it seems like to me. When we have large decisions, and we kind of also talked about this in small group, when we have those decisions, do we seek the Lord first in our decision-making process? Do we tend to look to our parents? Do we tend to look grandparents, a sibling, a trusted friend? But shouldn't we be seeking and asking the Lord and asking Him for guidance? After all, He's the one guiding our steps and guiding our paths every step of the way. I think about, many times, and we're even guilty of it as well. If you have something wrong or something that's like medical related going wrong, I'm no medical professional, and Stephanie, my wife, is no medical professional either. Many times we're consulting Dr. Google as the first consultant, why not seek the Lord and ask for healing from Him? The Lord will heal us. With the illustration of the large farm and the large barns and silos to hold all the equipment, what good is it if we look at it and say, nah, that's not big enough? That's essentially like saying, Lord, what you did, not good enough. I'll take it from here. No, we shouldn't be that way. My grandfather was a dairy farmer in Maine and had a lot of cows. And I had the privilege of spending plenty of time up there and being able to see how a farm operated. And I'm not saying he was this way, but being up there and seeing that, it's easy to see how one can get in a way of saying, I built all this, right? You're the one tending at the 2 a.m. milkings of cows, or you're the one getting up early, doing all this work. And it's easy to say, well, yeah, I'm the one doing this, or I'm the one doing that. But no, the Lord is working through it, and the Lord is providing for that opportunity. It's easy to first turn to the things of the world, like the things we own, how much money we have, or how big our house is, even how big the church we go to is. But is that truly what matters when it comes to our relationship with the Lord? The Lord values our heart, but what do we hold dear to our heart? I encourage you this week to examine your hearts and really think about, what is it that I hold close to me? What is it that I hold of most value? Continuing, verse 19 through 21 shows us that the man kind of kicked his feet back, right? Kicked his feet back and relaxed in the so-called riches that he thought he had. After a hard day's work, especially after kickball yesterday, how nice was it to kind of just sit back and relax, right? We may be tired for a bit, but are we pleased Like, the man seemed pleased with his status. He seemed like, I've got all this kind of stored up. I'm good for now. He was really concerned with his physical self and not really concerned with his spiritual self. As I kind of gathered, the man was rich on earth, but was not rich in spirit. Like we mentioned before, everything that we worked so hard for ultimately will be left to someone else. Ultimately, the things that your parents may have, may be left to you. Like I said, it's not going with them to the grave, so it's got to be left to somebody else, right? We see that in 1 Timothy 6:6-7. It says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of it." Everything we accumulate, all the riches that we have on earth, will not carry with us when we die. How many people know how to play chess in here? Right. So I heard this interesting quote, kind of meshing these two concepts together. Essentially saying, whether you're a king or you're a pawn, they both go back in the box at the end of the day. So no matter what, whether you're a king or whether you're a pawn, it's all just going to get put back in the box, and it doesn't matter at the end of the day. We all will have our judgment day and leave behind all the things that we worked for and treasured on earth. To me, this quote was interesting because whether we make it to the top of the corporate ladder that we're trying to, or whether we just barely scraped by, we'll all leave this earth with nothing. Whether we had, houses all across the earth, all across the world, or whether we just had one house that we lived in all our lives. Both situations, we leave the earth the same way, with nothing. One other thing I'll add to this section is that we should just continue to be good stewards of the things that the Lord has blessed us with. We shouldn't blur the lines of saying, well, yeah, but I did this or I did that, and then, the Lord only provided me with these things. Ultimately, the Lord provided us with all of it, and we're commanded to be good stewards of everything that He's given us. We also need to ensure that we don't become a rich fool, right? Someone who's rich in the sight of the world, but foolish in the eyes of the Lord. Matthew 6:24 states, "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." And I'll also add 1 Timothy 6:10, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs." The Bible is clear that we cannot be servants of the Lord and be striving to be wealthy at the same time, or have all the money that we want. There are plenty of people that have money and that are good godly men. And I think the difference becomes where are our desires. We've all been blessed with different talents. If we all had the same talent, what good would we be doing? If we all were good athletes, well, great. But we need each of us to, some of us are better singers than others. You don't want me up here singing or playing a guitar. I will make a joyful noise, but it will not be joyful to your ears. So now if we continue into the second section, which is more about not being anxious. How many of us get anxious about things during our daily lives? I'll even admit, sitting back there before coming up here, I was kind of feeling that way too. But I was seeking the Lord and praying to the Lord, saying, calm any nerves that may come up, that I may deliver what you want me to say. It's easy to do, whether we've got some event going on, whether we have to stand up in front of people, talk to them, or even just what is someone else going to think of us? I struggled with that too. I struggled with, well, what is someone going to think of me if I do this? I also mentioned in small group that in school, I hated being wrong. So I just wouldn't raise my hand. I wouldn't answer a question, even if I 100% knew the answer was right. The chance of me being potentially wrong, that was it. I didn't even want to answer it. But what was I missing? We should be confident in who we are in Christ, right? Psalm 139 says we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Ultimately, we're made in the image of God, and the Lord has a tremendous plan for us. So what do we have to be anxious about? And especially if the Lord's there guiding our steps, the Lord's plans are better than ours. So why would we be anxious about what the Lord has planned for us, right? We may not know what the Lord has for us, but we should trust in his plan that it's good. I mean, and ultimately, has he ever failed us? No. I know that in a way makes it kind of sound easy, like, yeah, I'll just, stop being anxious now. But ultimately we should be truly seeking the Lord. And when we're feeling anxious or anything like that, seek the Lord in prayer. As we mentioned, prayer is powerful. Continuing verse 22 and 23 give us a good picture that we shouldn't worry about the material things in life. Specifically giving us the examples of what we will eat or what we will put on. Jesus tells us that our lives are more than just the clothing that we put on or the things that we eat. As many of you know, have seen me, I'm always dressed up for work, right? Camp is like the one time that you see me out of my non-work clothes. But many times, where are we finding our identity? Am I finding my identity in the dress clothes that I wear for work, or am I finding it in the Lord? Many times I think we get too caught up in the things of this world that we lose focus on the fact that God will always provide for us and give us what we need. Even if we think, I don't know if he's going to do it, he will always come through. We see this further expounded upon in verses 24 through 28. Jesus explains how the ravens have the food that they need, thanks to the Lord. Also, he touches on the fact that the lilies and the grass are taken care of. We go outside, we play, trample along the grass, but do we really think, the Lord is actually providing for the grass? Do we actually think that? I know with going through this, I kind of had to stop and think, I don't know. We have a good time playing kickball, playing in the grass, but we don't ever think that. If God cares so much about the ravens or even the grass, how much more does he care about you? Like it says at the end of verse 24, of how much more value are you than the birds? We have tremendous value in the Lord. Why do we often lose sight and place our worth in material things? I'll speed up here. One thing I want us to grasp, especially in verse 25 and 26, says, and which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to a span of life? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Being anxious doesn't change anything, right? The Lord knows our steps, as I mentioned, and is guiding us. So why should we be anxious when our Heavenly Father's right by our side? We always have fear of being alone, but we're never alone with the Lord. The Lord is always there. The Lord's ways are better than ours. One verse I want to read, and it's fitting because it's actually on the back wall when you leave, is Philippians 4:6. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. If we're anxious about stuff, guys, let's pray to the Lord for it. The Lord will help us through whatever we may be going through. Verses 29 through 31, as we continue, remind us again that we should not seek after the things of this world, like the food or clothing. The Lord knows what we need, and we should seek after him for it. As it says in verse 31, instead, seek his kingdom, and all these things will be added to you. Right? We shouldn't seek the things of the world and then hope to find the Lord. We should seek the Lord, and then the Lord will provide us with what we need. I know this, thinking about that can be hard because we want to take control, right? Especially us guys. We want to take control of the situation, be the man of the situation. But there's even all sorts of worldly pressures and distractions, higher paying job, what status do we want to be, whether it's being on corporate boards, different things like that. But what does that matter if that's not what the Lord has for us? If we're seeking that, but the Lord doesn't have that in our plan, what good is that doing? The last few verses, 32 through 34. The Lord takes pleasure in giving us the kingdom. If it is his ultimate pleasure to do so, then why is it so hard for us to truly seek after the kingdom that he desires to give us? Why are we always getting distracted? Things easily get us distracted. The world is going to making everything so shiny in an attempt to distract us. And we are so easily distracted by the world. It says, sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. As I had mentioned before, and these verses illustrate, the treasure that we have in heaven will never fail, never go out of style, never breaks. Clothing comes in waves. Some trends come in, then they go out. Then they come back again and go out. But the Lord never does that. No one will be able to steal or destroy the treasures that we have in heaven like they can the things of this earth. If we're better off, if we're treasuring the things on earth, we're better off to sell them and have nothing if all we have is the Lord. Just to wrap it up, I know we've gone through and discussed about the rich fool and the fact that he placed all his possessions in worldly goods instead of the things that the Lord provided him and the opportunities that the Lord provided him. He could have, instead of saying, I'm just kind of sit here and relax, he could have been one to go out and share the gospel of saying, here's what the Lord provided me. But instead, he said, I need bigger barns. I need more. I need more than what I've been given. We also emphasize the fact that we shouldn't be anxious about the things that the Lord already knows that we need. We are supposed to seek him and the kingdom, and he is pleasured to give it to us. He wants to give us the kingdom, so why not seek him for it? One thing I'll leave you with, one last quote I had heard, is we all leave the world the same way that we came into it, empty-handed. In light of that, let's seek to not be a rich fool. Let's not be wise in the eyes of the world. But let's be wise in the eyes of the Lord and continually be seeking him in his kingdom every day.